Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Buddhist Path of Awakening course. And we are tonight going to go back and review some teachings from Volume 2 of the Profound Treasury, teachings on the doctrine of emptiness, shunyata. This is one of the most important and profound doctrines or teachings in all of Buddhism. It only is available to people who have reached the Bodhisattva path. It's really, in fact, the discovery of emptiness is the entrance into the Bodhisattva path. There's nobody sort of gate watching and telling you that you've done it. But the first stage, the Bodhisattva path is divided into 10 stages called bhumis. Bhumi literally means earth. 10 earth stages. And the first bhumi is called great joy, because one is beginning to discover and become part of reality. The reason we're doing this is because it's very synchronous with the teachings we've been working through, especially those of Tulku Ujin, who was basically teaching us how to rest in shamatha and vipassana, as he called it, but really it was how to rest in reality. And he was describing the state of mind, anyhow, or the kind of meditation that one experiences with the discovery of shunyata. Shunyata, the word, shunya means empty. Shunyata means emptiness, voidness. The Tibetan is tongpa ni. Tong means empty, pa means empty, again, of sort of an adjectival, and ni means ness, N-E-S-S, like a nominative. What is it empty of? This could be described, in a number of ways. The main thing it's empty of is concepts. Concepts of any kind. Thoughts that describe reality, because all thought is about me. Me and my problem, me and my endeavor, me and my circumstance. And it's all about improving the situation for me. What Shunyata is saying is that reality is empty of me. There is no such thing. It's a complete myth. Just like the idea of a griffin. I forget the example he used in the chapter. What was it, Michael? Do you remember? He's an example, some kind of mythical animal. Doesn't exist. I is just a figment of one's imagination. It's part of a story that we tell ourselves. And that story, when we tell it, is concept. It's thought. It's words. When you sit here and you think, what am I going to have for dinner? Do I have anything good to eat? And we're involved in a story about I. Now, as soon as you have I, or almost as soon as, you have the idea of other as well, that out there. I is always in relationship to something external. I like my sweater, I like my dinner, I don't like this dinner, whatever it might be. And so there's this fraught relationship between this mythic I that only lives in the story that we tell ourselves, and this arbitrarily selected other. I mean, there's all this stuff out there. Look at this screen. Here's this guy, he's got bald head, he's got black sweater. I mean, you can mention all these different things about him, but basically you're just pointing out and naming aspects. And meanwhile, the whole thing is coming and going and changing instant by instant. But we say, I like this, or I don't like that, whatever it may be. And so we get caught in a drama, the drama of I and other, a happiness pursuit, that we're going to manipulate the relationship between I and other in such a way as to make that I happy. And all of this is a mental construction. It lives in thought, dreams, words, emotions that come and go, and when they're gone, they're completely gone. It's like you have this idea, this thought, and suddenly it's passed, and the next one comes, and it's evaporated into nowhere. These stories do that. So, shunyata is empty. That's what shunyata means, emptiness. It's empty of all that. Empty of I and other. This is the twofold emptiness. It's emptiness of the story that connects the two, I and other. Me and mine, he says, is a fantasy concept. In the same way that, and then here it is, the same way that, quote, there is a flying saucer in the sky is a fantasy concept. That is really important. There actually isn't any such thing. As I and other. And shunyata is discovering that. Or it's the description of reality without that. And we can enter into that. Actually, we can't, because we don't exist either. We is just the plural of I, but it can be discovered and lived. And in this living, there is tremendous benefit. There is benefit in the sense of freedom, freedom from the slavery of thought. There is increased intelligence, because when you're caught up in the dramas of I and other, you're seeing the world through these stories. And these are just stories, they're fictions. They're not accurate. And they're so temporary. 5 minutes later, you can't even remember what the one you just had was. Some of them, a lot of them. And in the absence of these stories about me, which are so selfish and self-centered, compassion can actually blossom. Love for the world, wanting to be of benefit and of service and of help to other sentient beings. So, shunyata opens up these two aspects, these two primary aspects. One is seeing things as they actually are, stripped of these stories about I and other, which are just myths. And then opening of the heart. Because those stories about I and other are mean. They're always selfish. They're always self-aggrandizing. They're dominated by what are called the three poisons. When I and other are in relationship, there are three ways that they can relate. They can get, if you don't like that other, you get further away from it. That's aggression. If you think that other is going to make the I happier, then you want to pull it to you. That's passion. That's the second poison. And if you don't think that it's one or the other, either of those, you're just indifferent and you're neutral. And that is regarded as what's called moha in the Sanskrit, and it's usually translated as ignorance, although you don't want to confuse it with the fundamental ignorance of avidya, not seeing, of the fundamental ignorance of being caught in I. This is a different kind. It's indifference, stupidity. So we're freed from those three things by shunyata, the three poisons. And when they appear again, we are back into samsara. We are back into confusion and suffering, the stories of I and other. And in order to do this, the technique, of course, involves study like we're doing now. And then there's the practice of making it actually happen. And this comes about through your meditation practice, shamatha and vipassana. The shamatha brings you back from the dreams. You focus one-pointedly on an object, and you cut through those dreams of I and other with all of their fraught tension. And you come back to simple awareness of an object like the breath. And there's tremendous relaxation in that. You can't live your life like that because you got to get up and drive your car and cook dinner for your family and all that stuff. But it gives you respite from the anxiety, the tension, the fear, the hope and fear of I and other. And then, having come back, we can practice vipassana, which means that now that we're back from the dreams, we can be aware, we can relax into open awareness of this world. And that is where you begin to discover shunyata, in this open awareness that we can come back to, this awareness of space. We've been practicing it all the time in our meditations, morning and evening. And the trick is to take it into your daily life, so that in daily life, you're remembering, oh, I've been lost in a dream about me and my problem, me and my hope, me and my endeavor. I've been lost in that dream. You realize that, and you come back to this in peace, which is the shamatha, and in open awareness, which is the vipassana. Those are the two main techniques, especially vipassana, which contains shamatha. You can't do vipassana properly at all, or if at all, without that peace of shamatha. Shamatha, the Tibetan for shamatha, is shine, which literally means abiding in peace. Shi is peace, and ne means to dwell. So there are these practices, but when we begin to actually experience emptiness, we're really transcending any practice. It's becoming real. It's not simply a practice, an exercise. We are beginning to discover the peace that is there in pure awareness. And we're beginning to discover the thoughtless freedom from concept that is there in emptiness. So it isn't a matter of mental gymnastics, which is what we're doing, sort of the way we're approaching meditation at the beginning of the path. We're trying to train our minds as though we're sort of in a gym. So we're really discovering peace, clarity, and heart. Yeah, he says, the problem is not with the practice, but with your attitude. There's the self-improving essence of samsara. That's what samsara, the confusion, the unhappiness, is all about self-improvement. Because you see yourself as lacking, and so you need to improve whatever. So the whole trick, again and again, as we walk down the street, as we wash the dish, as we say hello to a friend, is to come back. Come back to this. Relax back into what's already here. This open, clear, simple awareness. Again and again. And if we think, oh, I'm just lost in thought, that's another thought. And just see it, let it go, and here we are, because this is where we live. He talks about the threefold purity that we discover in shunyata. That is, no giver, no giving, and no recipient. Those are just concepts. They're ego's concepts about me and my and what I'm giving and how generous I am and what a good person I am and all that out the window. He says, in actual shunyata experience, there is no longer any discrimination. This and that, better, worse. However, you would still distinguish between the disciplined and the undisciplined state of being. The undisciplined state of being is constantly being lost in dreams. And then the disciplined state of being is coming back. Here we are, right now. It's very simple. It's utterly simple. It's the most simple thing one could do. So we're giving up a reference point. The reference point is always I and other, me and you, me and them, whatever it might be. Me and my life, me and my problems, me and my money, me and my food, who knows what. And we're giving up those reference points. And in order to do this, to open to this world, giving up these self-aggrandizing, self-improving schemes, in order to do this, he says, the actions taking place between this and that, in order to do that, you have to develop trust or warmth. That's part of it too. Coming back to this, relaxing into this, trusting in this life, we develop trust and warmth. And in order to have warmth, you have to have an awareness of thisness and the non-existence of thisness, and an awareness of thatness and the non-existence of thatness. So shunyata is meditative experience, and there are no techniques for it. It's real. There's no technique. It's not like a self-improvement exercise. Not even the technique of awareness, he says. Your mind is just open, simply being or non-being, whatever you want to call it. It's not awareness as such. It's just being open. He says the practice of awareness, if we're trying to be aware, it's still involved with achievement, self-improvement, fantasy of the path and the goal. But once you get into shunyata, you realize that you're letting go of that. You're relaxing into this that's already here. The whole thing, that's the big trick about it. It's already here. So if we try to create it, enter it, whatever we might do, we're adding on something that's not there. And we're missing it. It's already here. We just relax back into this. He says, it is just a question of being. It's necessary to know that from awareness comes warmth, and from warmth comes non-reference point. Non-reference point means no I and other, no self-improvement. And then he says, when awareness is no longer a battle, but something you just remember, you come back to, you relax into, warmth arises as a natural process. There is no path and no goal. How about that one? No path and no goal. Your accustomed reference point has been completely cut through. It is gone forever. There's just this. This is the real. We've awoken, waked up from dreams. Yeah. He says, there is an absence of technique, an absence of reference point, absence of any purpose or goal. We're just here, being responsive, involved, playing with life. You just sit like a rock when you sit. Here's a quote, the spiritual desire to attain enlightenment accompanies the entire Bodhisattva path. And there is also the desire to help other people. But those ideas are based on the perspective of non-reference point, so it is not at all personal. The whole thing is based on it being utterly impersonal. It's just as it is, this. It's not a matter of me and mine. Like I'm going to get enlightened. I'll get enlightened, and then I'll be better than a lot of people. Not so. Without the background of shamatha and vipassana, you cannot actually experience the shunyata state of meditation. You need to have practiced and experienced mindfulness and awareness, or you might have problems. Shunyata could become an imaginary thing, instead of simple, direct, real experience, real understanding. So I'm going to stop there. I just want to say this, that what we're being exhorted to do is to remember when we dream and just come back to this over and over again with utter simplicity. And if you say, when you come back, you say, oh, I'm not really coming back, let that go too and come back from that. It doesn't matter. Really what counts is remembering and coming back and touching in to this. So I'll stop there and turn this over to Michael.
So to begin with, I just wanted to say something about following up with what John said, something about the problems with conceptual mind. Even the Hinayana teachings say that all conceptual minds are mistaken. And the reason for that, the first reason for that, is we tend to mistake concept for the experience. I could spend a long time describing to you something like the Grand Canyon or the taste of a Hershey's chocolate bar, but it still wouldn't be the same thing as the actual experience. And yet, when we get caught up in our concepts, we lose sight of the immediacy of actual direct experience. It's also said, or another problem is that we develop concepts through exclusion. If you remember, Tralog Rinpoche said this back when we read his book, Mind at Ease, but it's there in Hinayana philosophical teachings as well. And so what this leads to is binary thinking. Something's either this or that, and a certain fixation on things being one way or the other. And then finally, any concept is limited. Anytime we're looking at the world through a conceptual lens, we're looking through a pinpoint, like a little pinhole, and seeing at best a limited version of what things are. If not, you could also say in some cases, more extreme cases, it's like wearing colored glasses. Except colored glasses can be kind of interesting and amusing, but the colored glasses that we fall into with conceptual mind are thoughts of aggression, paranoia, jealousy, desire, and an entire world looks a certain way to us because we're so caught up in what we believe the world is at those points in time. So it's important that we understand something about letting go of all of that. And so I suggest that we all take a good posture, a good seat, allow ourselves to settle. And what we want to do is just connect with direct awareness. Awareness is just a knowing mind, not knowing on the level of concepts and labels, but knowing in the sense of immediate experience. If I clap my hand, we know we heard a sound. All the labels, all the judgments, whatever thoughts we might have come secondary to that. But in meditation, we're just staying with just the direct, immediate experience, whatever it is. Whatever it is that we see, feel, smell, taste, touch, think. And we just let it be in its natural state, just as it is. So if we could just do that for a few minutes, allow ourselves to settle. Just rest in direct, present awareness. So when we make contact with nowness, we're able to just see things as they are, be with ourselves as they are. We might just have a glimpse of shunyata, emptiness, just letting go, allowing ourselves to open up just as we are, with things as they are. So chapter 19 was titled Discovering a World Beyond Ego. And this chapter, like the one that John talked about, or in this entire section of the book, is titled Emptiness and Compassion, because there's an intimate relationship between emptiness and compassion that we'll talk about a little bit tonight, and I'm sure in the chapters that we'll be reading in the next few weeks to come. If you were to think of it purely in cause and effect terms, sometimes it could seem like compassion is one of the causes for emptiness, but then it also turns around that emptiness can be a cause for compassion as well. So it's not really particularly important to get entangled in thinking in that way, but they're all just part of what's innately true of us, innately true of our true nature, our Buddha nature, you could say. So this chapter, Discovering a World Beyond Ego, begins with a section titled Developing Egolessness, the Hinayana Foundation. And what Trungpa Rinpoche says is the Mahayana, like the Hinayana, is based on the development of egolessness. In general, the various levels of the path have to do with your relationship to ego and your understanding of egolessness. So in this sense, we're beginning just as we did with Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso's book, Progressive Stages of realizing emptiness. We're beginning with the discovery of egolessness, of letting go of a false view of self, letting go of the myth that in some way we exist in some permanent, unchanging, independent, singular way. And in particular, in this particular chapter, Trungpa Rinpoche talks about twofold egolessness and twofold ego. And it says that the Mahayana realization of twofold egolessness is dependent on the Hinayana, and that you first need to develop egolessness of individuality, what we call egolessness of self, as well as the first half of egolessness of dharmas. So, as John said, shunyata is being free of, letting go of any kind of concept, preconception, fixed view, habitual way of thinking about things. And one of the deepest habits we have is this belief in an ego, taking ourselves to truly exist in a way that we don't. In the Hinayana, individual salvation means working with yourself, and it's based on renunciation, and then renouncing the renunciation itself. So this is how we overcome ego of individuality, ego of self. We begin to let go, we begin to open up, we begin to understand something about how we keep ourselves caught in confusion by and through this belief in ego. There's an interesting relationship between this chapter and another chapter of the book, chapter 8, called Overcoming Ego Fixation. So I'm going to actually quote a little bit from that. What Trungpa Rinpoche says in chapter 8, Overcoming Ego Fixation, is if you follow the sequence of the five skandhas, remember the five skandhas are the constituents of what we take to be a self, the five aggregates or five heaps that make up what we take to be an ego. If you follow the sequence of the five skandhas and the 12 nidanas, which I'll talk about in a moment, it becomes crystal clear that the world is not made by someone else, but is of our own making. So with this, he's not only talking about the first stage of egolessness that we read about in Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso's book, Becoming to See Through Ego, but also the second stage where he talked about the Chittamatra, or mind only. The realization that there's not truly a world that's separate from our mind. That the notion of a duality of perceiver and perceived is a habitual conceptual habit that we get caught up in, instead of realizing that the world that we live in is a world of our own making. Again, continuing with chapter 8, in the Hinayana, you dissect your ego and divide it into its components. You divide the ego into the five skandhas and study the case history of ego in the form of the 12 nidanas. But he goes on to say, but simply learning about the five skandhas doesn't help. You have to work on each individual skandha step by step. In other words, we need to see through. We need to understand and see through how we create ego by first deciding in some way that something is me and something else is not me. And then elaborating with feelings about that, perceptions about that, concepts about that. And in that way, we create a world that, as he says, is not made by someone else, but is of our own making. Which leads to the second stage of progressive realization of emptiness, beginning to see through the fictional duality of self and other. Returning to the chapter we read tonight, he says, once you've accomplished the egolessness of self, you're on the brink of discovery of ego of dharmas. You begin to question why you're doing all this, and you discover the karmic chain reactions of the 12 nidanas. So again, if you remember from our previous study of the Hinayana, the 12 nidanas are the five links that, of karmic creation, beginning with ignorance all the way up through solid views of self and other, and ultimately birth, old age, and death. And as you study the nidanas, or interdependent origination, you realize we have to reverse that process to cut through it. So again, to refer back to chapter 8, Overcoming Ego Fixation, the first fold is egolessness of self. He's defining ego of self and ego of other, or ego of individuality and ego of dharmas. The first fold is egolessness of self. Having understood that, you go on to the second fold, the egolessness of external phenomena or dharmas. At this point, your understanding is only partial, so is referred to as 1.5-fold egolessness. You've realized the egolessness of external phenomena, but not the egolessness of the perceiving itself. So in other words, we have some understanding that not only are we, as some kind of, in our belief of ego, not only are we not permanent, unchanging, independent, and singular, but the phenomena, everything in the world around us is interdependent. Everything in the world around us is impermanent, meaning constantly changing. It's easy to think of impermanent as meaning either here or not here, but what it really refers to is the process of constant change. And interdependence refers to all of the interconnections and what Thich Nhat Hanh calls the interbeing of things, all of the causes and conditions that allow for any one thing at any moment to appear. This computer in front of us, all of the causes and conditions that brought that device into being. The lights in our room, the heating system in our house, in the natural world, all the things that lead to a tree or a plant growing, ground, soil, sun, water, cultivation, fertilizer, all of those, all the complexity of interbeing, of interdependence. And we come to see that this is not only true of us as individuals, but it's also true of everything in the world around us. So this last half fold of ego is the perceiving itself. In the current chapter that we read, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be too confusing by skipping between chapter 8 and this chapter 19, but I think it was helpful. I think what he said in chapter 8 was actually very clear about 1.5 and twofold ego. So returning to the present chapter, he says, we've managed to work on the gross level of our experience of dharmas, or things as they are, but we still perceive in terms of opinion and attitude. This is, again, this last half-fold of egolessness, which goes a long way and is particularly difficult to overcome. Sometimes the teachings talk about coarse and subtle obstacles. And so, like an attack of the kleshas, being angry, in one sense, that's a coarse obstacle. But it's easy to see, even if it can be difficult to work with, because at some point we come out of it, we relax, it dissolves because it's impermanent, and we can at least look back, even if we don't recognize at the time that we really got swept away. Subtle obstacles are harder to see because they're more habitual. They're they're not as immediately apparent, and so. This last half-fold of ego is really, for most of us, a more subtle obstacle. In any case, we've managed to work on the gross level of experience of dharmas, or things as they are, but we still perceive in terms of opinions and attitude. At a gross level, your attitudes, perceptions, and opinions about the ego of dharma have been cut through by your experience and understanding the 12 nidanas. But at a subtle level, you have not reached a full understanding of where all those things come from. The source is not cut through. So again, you can think of this in one sense as referring to our tendency to see the world in terms of self and other, to see the world in dualistic terms as well as conceptual terms. That dualism is a very fundamental concept that's so habitual it's hard to see through. It's so habitual that we get caught up in all the struggles and dramas of self and other before we realize it's actually a drama that we created ourselves, that it's a dream that we can, in the moment, if we can just rest in nowness, begin to see through. So he says the ego of dharmas comes from the fixation on the am of I am. We've liberated the I. At this point, we have some sense of what it means to see through the first of the progressive stages of realization of emptiness. We see through some sense of the fictitious nature of ego. If nothing else, we see how we change all the time. That we start the day feeling one way, and through the day have many different perceptions, feelings of all kinds, and come the evening, another set of perceptions and feelings and motivations and desires. We begin our meditation with the intention of simply staying present, and within moments are distracted, caught up in dreams. So we see that there's nothing fixed, nothing that you can really pinpoint as this is the self, this is I. But in this case, at this point, so we're talking about, again, a progressive stage along the path. We've liberated the I, but we still have not clarified the level of am. He says that the practice of shamatha and with regard to the practice of shamatha and vipassana, that we've attained a state of mind in which we can relax and actually trust something, that we still come up with these two problems of I am, what and what, who I am, what I am, where I am, and what's going on. So these are the two types of ego. And then he says, according to Hinayana Abhidharma, dharmas are not quite real. And again, dharmas are any knowable thing. Anything, ourselves, the world around us. They're real as if you had a cup of tea in your hand, as real as what you have in reality, but it's only a temporary reality. Ultimately, nothing is real. There's nothing to hold on to, and nothing is holding on to anything. That's why egolessness is possible. You feel everything as surface, as waves floating back and forth continuously, but none of that is actually true or real. That's actually from chapter 68, but again, I think it refers to what we're talking about here. He goes on to talk about, on the Mahayana level, that in the Mahayana we're giving up and letting go. We're letting go of our fixation, first of all, in individual salvation. This is letting go of the mental gymnastics, as John talked about. It's letting go of what can actually, again, even within that section, he says the real problem is the attitude we have toward practice, not the practice itself. And the attitude is a form of subtle aggression toward oneself, that I'm not good enough, I need to be different. And if we approach practice in that way, it can be helpful, but can also be an obstacle at the same time. And at some point, we need to let go of any kind of aggression, any kind of negative view of ourselves, that somehow we're lacking in something, or that we need to be fixed in some way. So we're letting go of fixation on egoless and individual salvation, and letting go of, he says, our righteousness and religiosity. Everything is regarded as attitude, but it's not attitude that's being cut through. Rather, it's the attituder, or the experiencer of attitude, that is cut through. This is this last half-fold of egolessness. It's the attituder, or the experience of attitude, that is cut through, which is the second half of ego of dharmas. When the experience of mind's creation has been cut through, you realize everything is understandable and perceivable. Because we're able to let go of concepts, we're able to let go of preconceptions. And then things do become understandable and perceivable in direct, simple, immediate experience of now. Just like when I clap my hands, we just know. When we become to overcome the fixator, this is again all referring to this last half-fold of ego, this last egolessness of dharmas. When we become to overcome the fixator, the philosopher, the conceptualizer, you begin to develop an appreciation for the absence of twofold ego. Although it's not easy, and it may not happen completely, you still feel that you've overcome something. And at that point, the dawn of Mahayana, or the dawn of the absence of twofold ego, occurs in your mind. He actually says it's quite cheerful and not depressing at all. The vast action of a bodhisattva begins to develop, and you experience the dawn of Mahayana as luminosity and brilliance. Because we've let go, we've opened up. And it's just as simple as that sound of clapping hands. It's like the experience that at least I've had in meditation, particularly when I was working full-time and be very busy, would come home at night and do meditation practice. And at some point I'd hear the crickets outside, and I'd realize they didn't just start then. It's been going on for a while. What happened is I'd settled down enough to be actually able to hear and actually be in my immediate experience. And I think we've all had this experience in meditation. We begin sitting, and we're asked to take a good posture and feel how we're feeling. And suddenly we become aware of tightness that we weren't aware of a moment ago. And it's because we're able to let go, relax, not be so caught up in conceptual mind that we're not paying attention, we're not in tune with our actual experience in the moment. And that's what he's talking about here. When we're able to really open and let go, then it is luminous and brilliant, because it's clear, it's direct, it's immediate. There's no barrier to conceptual mind. The next section in this chapter is titled Differentiating Technique and Experience. And again, he reminds us that the development of egolessness is a progressive process, not a sudden attainment. And he goes through kind of an overview again of the path. And I think we've heard this before, but it begins with shamatha. That shamatha is the basic technique. And again, this is very similar to what we read in the last couple of weeks, the chapter on shamatha, Vipassana, and Tulku Ujin's text. That so long as we're in, as he put it, the habit of following thought after thought, as long as we continue to be caught up in stories and dreams, there is no attention to our present experience. We're not available. So it's by first settling down, by first overcoming this habit of following thought after thought, and overcoming the effort that we make mistakenly in meditation practice to create a state of mind, rather than just seeing what our state of mind is, which is really what meditation is about. When we're able to let go of all of that, let go of technique, let go of effort, just allow ourselves to settle in present experience, then we begin to develop Vipassana. As Trungpa Rinpoche says, Vipassana, clear seeing, superior seeing. Vipassana, awareness practice, is the practice that leads to the realization of the first egolessness, which is the egolessness of self. and then to the realization of 1.5-fold egolessness. So again, it's progressive stages, just like Khenpo Sultan Gyaltsen said, which is the egolessness of self and the first half of the egolessness of dharma. So again, we're talking about 1.5 and 2-fold egolessness here. And he says, Vipassana practice culminates in prajna, the technique that brings the complete experience of 2-fold egolessness of shunyata. So it's through Vipassana that we open fully to our innate intelligence, our innate curiosity, and our innate clarity. And when we open to that, and it's, again, innate, it's already there. We just don't recognize it. We don't trust it. We don't allow ourselves to experience it because we're too caught up in all the struggles and dramas of ego. But when we're able to let go, we're able to settle in shamatha, Vipassana develops, and with Vipassana comes prajna. And again, it's prajna that ultimately sees twofold egolessness. So he says, first there is the tool, and then there is the experience. And he says we should not confuse the technique with the experience. And he says you can't have Mahayana with Vipassana. It would be like a tree without a trunk. Again, progressive. Development of egolessness is a progressive process. You could not experience, and prajna gives birth to the shunyata experience of the Buddhas, and Vipassana is the stone that sharpens the sword of prajna. You could not experience 2-fold egolessness just with Vipassana because you couldn't do it without prajna. But if you abandon Vipassana, you won't get anywhere at all. So we begin with shamatha practice. Out of shamatha practice develops Vipassana. Through Vipassana, which is sometimes one of the epithets or labels for Vipassana, is the flame that burns the fuel of conceptual ego mind. Begin to see through conceptual mind and just allow ourselves to see and direct experience the Dharma. So we need this. And then prajna, he says, is as much a technique as Vipassana or shamatha. And shunyata is what you get. So prajna is what you're going to get it with. And he wants us to be very clear about this. That prajna, he says, could be regarded as like a microscope, and shunyata is what's on the slide. So it's prajna, it's the awakening of our innate intelligence, prajna, higher prajna. That's what allows us to actually experience or be in shunyata. It's not that we make things into shunyata, they're that way already, but we don't recognize it because we're too caught up in ignorance. And he says this is why the Heart Sutra places an emphasis on prajna. He says shunyata is discovered in phrases like no eye, no ears, and no eye, no tongue, and so on and so forth. But it's actually prajna that's important here. The shunyata experience develops naturally as our prajna develops. And our prajna develops naturally as we practice shunyata as we practice Vipassana and shamatha. And for this reason, he says that sharpening and cleaning your instrument, which is our ability to see, superior seeing, clear seeing, Vipassana, sharpening and cleaning and developing our prajna through Vipassana practice, sharpening and cleaning your instrument is more important than what you see with it. He says you can't cut with shunyata. Shunyata happens after the fact. Prajna is the instrument with which you discover shunyata. So shunyata, and it says traditionally shunyata is regarded as the child of prajna paramita. So that's why he talks about differentiating technique and experience. Ultimately, we're meant to, through shamatha practice, develop Vipassana. Through Vipassana practice, recognize and allow our inherent prajna, and with that we discover shunyata through letting go of concepts, preconceptions, all of the things that get in the way. The next section in this chapter was titled Losing Your Ego and Rediscovering Your Youthfulness. And with this, he says, in the beginning, in the early stages, your journey could be seen as an actual journey. We think we're getting somewhere. But as we practice and study and commit ourselves to the path, commit ourselves through refuge vow and bodhisattva vow in particular, it becomes a non-journey. And it's interesting because he goes back and forth using the word journey and non-journey here. But the basic sense is the journey becomes more inward and deeper. So I think when he says it's not a journey to get from here to somewhere else, it's more a journey to find out who we already are. that we're not trying to get away from ourselves or away from our experience, but actually just realize what our true nature and what our experience really is. He says and he says this deeper journey takes place by means of compassion. But the more we're willing to extend ourselves to others and extend ourselves to the world, that much deeper our inward journey becomes, and that much more apparent, definite, and real it becomes. And he says the first step in this is the Bodhisattva vow and Mahayana commitment, that we dedicate ourselves to others, and we find that dedicating to ourselves to others brings us much closer to the idea of basic sanity, Buddha nature, whatever we want to call it. I think for myself, in terms of my understanding of the Mahayana teachings, there's a real change. I think this relates to what he's saying here. At one time I would have said, I think the Mahayana teachings are beautiful. It's the way I'd want to be in the world. The idea of compassion and kindness as, a way of life made a lot of sense to me. But at some point I realized that, in fact, without a compassionate outlook toward the world, that there's always going to be some kind of picking and choosing, some kind of picking and choosing, discriminating of some sort, and that it's only through developing compassion that we develop a true openness to the world without struggle, that we develop a true openness to the world without bias, so that it's how can I put this? It's not just that the Mahayana is a beautiful set of ideas, but what he's saying is it's absolutely necessary to develop compassion in order to open ourselves fully. That without compassion, this is how ultimately compassion becomes, is a vital part of the path. Anyway. So again, he says the first step is the Bodhisattva vow and Mahayana commitment. We dedicate ourselves to others, and we find that dedicating ourselves to others brings us much closer to the idea of basic sanity, Buddha nature, whatever we want to call it. And he says with this that we're no longer holding on to our old hats and get into, if anything, a new hat. That our old preconceptions, old ideas, and old trainings that might encourage us to hold on to the stronghold of ego, all of these have to be abandoned in order to rediscover ourselves. So again, we're talking about letting go of preconceptions, old ideas, old trainings. And he says, in spite of these, or maybe even because of our entanglement of these, our entanglement in these, we have not discovered continual, inexhaustible, the continual, inexhaustible, exuberant youth we possess in ourselves. And he says this sense of youthfulness has nothing to do with chronological age. We have possessed youthful qualities all along. But our involvement with preconceived notions of society, tradition, concepts, and ideas has made us old. So in a sense, the Bodhisattva path is a path of regaining our youth. So this is another problem with being stuck in conceptual mind. Our concepts relate to the past, and they're the way that we project our past into the present and into the future as well. And by opening up, letting go of these preconceptions, ideas, and concepts, we allow ourselves to experience things, just as it says in the chant, as fresh, vivid, immediate, and simple. Just like, again, right then and there. And this is what he means by an innate quality of youthfulness, freshness, vividness, presence. And in this sense, the Bodhisattva path is the path of regaining our youth, in the sense of just simply being open to direct experience, just things as they are, ourselves as we are. He says when we lose the grip of ego, we can no longer entertain or indulge ourselves in our usual ways. Again, letting go of the past, letting go of preconceptions, letting go of habitual mind. We begin to discover a new and clearer perspective toward the phenomenal world. Because we're opening ourselves up. We're letting go. This is the shunyata experience. We're finding a new hat approach to the old hat world. And then in the next section, which is titled Coming as You Are, He says this new old hat is called shunyata, but what it's called isn't important. What's important is the new faculty we've developed, this new lens we use to see old new hat, see old hat as new hat. Again, just seeing as fresh, direct, immediate, simple. But he says, then we're fooled again a bit, and this is because we tend to then grasp onto this experience. We try to possess it in some way, rather than, as Trungpa Rinpoche said in the chapters we read on Vipassana, that we should, the way that we maintain awareness is by disowning it, not by holding on to it, by letting go. Otherwise, we're referring to the moment before, and we're lost in a more subtle sense of the past than, thinking about our childhood. But still, it's a preoccupation with the past. So we're fooled again, is what Buddha actually asked us to do is that we not bring along any new eyeglasses, binoculars, microscopes, hearing aids, but instead we just come as we are. We just let go. We're okay just as we are. We can just be just as we are. And he says, at this point, we might want to hide, we might feel embarrassed, but we could just present ourselves as we are to our teacher, to the Buddha. And he talks about this in regard to the Heart Sutra. And again, that with the Heart Sutra, that those disciples who came with their particular cultures, traditions, inheritances, lenses, masks, found they couldn't use those gadgets to hear him. They took shelter, and again, this is because it become some kind of a refuge, some kind of a shelter in holding on to just 1.5 ego, without egolessness, without letting go into twofold egolessness, which is what the Heart Sutra is all about on one level. So he says they took shelter and security in their leftover portion of ego, that last half full, the attituder, the perceiver, the philosopher. And with the teaching of shunyata, he says the rug was pulled out from under them, or probably more accurately, he says the meditation cushion was pulled out from under them. And again, it's said historically that some had heart attacks. They were so devastated to find out that their way of seeing the world, which was a partial understanding, was still not full, true, complete enlightenment, as it says in the Heart Sutra. And the last section of this chapter is called Gaps of Unknowing, which I thought this was a particularly interesting section of this chapter, I thought. He goes on to say we need to refine our understanding of shunyata as much as we can, that the Mahayana provides an immense sense of freedom to think, freedom to react, freedom to practice, because we're no longer bound by old ideas, old concepts, old ways of looking at things. We're just open to the freshness of present experience, in which there's all kinds of possibilities. Whereas when we get caught up in concept and preconception, we foreclose. Again, we're looking at the world through a pinhole, or we're looking at the world through colored glasses, and we don't see things accurately because of distortions. So there's a tremendous sense of freedom with shunyata, a tremendous sense of freedom with the Mahayana altogether. And he says here that freedom is connected with the idea of basic sanity. And that basic sanity really usually comes through, he says, when we're going about our ordinary life. Otherwise, he says, it would just be theoretical. So he's talking about just basic, ordinary, simple, here and now existence. Or as he says, the world of kitchen sinks, bread and butter, and dollars and pounds. And he goes on to say, in our ordinary world, ordinarily, we usually operate in terms of our reaction to things. And he gives the example of a business deal where, ideally both people come out with something that they value, they both come out ahead, or of someone who needs help. But his point overall is that we generally take part in things when we have more to gain than lose. He says nobody really sacrifices their own interest in relating to the world, that it's give and take all the time. And he says that this world of exchange involves a misunderstanding of reality, definitely and absolutely. And that's because we're relating to the world in terms of sets of reference points. And it doesn't mean we go to the opposite extreme either, which is, again, that's one of the problems with conceptual mind. It's either this or that, as opposed to just seeing what's actually in front of us. But that world, he says, that world of exchange involves a misunderstanding of reality, definitely and absolutely. He says relating with current issues in our life raises questions about reality. How can we understand reality? How can we actually perceive reality in the proper and fullest sense? How can we make sure we've understood the basic phenomena of reality? It's a good question to stop with right there, but it goes on. He says that attempt to understand reality requires an attitude of expectation. This is an interesting point, I think. The expectation to understand things as they are. And this hoping, waiting, and expecting contains an element of bewilderment, confusion, and possibly blankness or uncertainty. And then he gives an example of expecting guests to arrive and that they're late, they haven't come yet, and that we might begin to think they don't want to come. We might begin to elaborate that into they're mad at us or develop some other kind of a story. But as he says, all we really know is they haven't arrived. And so then, interesting, a couple of important sentences here. So between all the flickering thoughts in regard to the situation, all the irritations and thoughts and concerns and beliefs and concepts, between all the flickering thoughts and the development of a state of mind where we solidify into something. So we have all these different thoughts and that solidifies. They're mad at us. They never really wanted to come. But in between those two, we experience a gap, space, and uncertainty. And that's what he's asking us to really experience, to really look at, this gap, space, uncertainty. It's very much like, always been an interesting thing to me that sometimes when somebody's really new to Dharma, there's a real freshness to their outlook. I was in a discussion group some time back where somebody who was fairly new just made an interesting comment that I think is pretty similar to what Trungpa Rinpoche says here. He was talking about his experience in meditation, and he said, well, there are all these thoughts I was caught up in, just again being totally mindless and distracted. And then there was a thought, I'm distracted. But there had to be something in between. And he's right. That's actually quite perceptive. This is very similar to what Milarepa said, that between two thoughts, there's awakened mind. Between two thoughts, there is Buddha. But it translated two different ways. And that's exactly what Trungpa Rinpoche is talking about here. This gap in between, all the flickering thoughts and the development of a solid state of mind. They're mad at me, they didn't want to come. He goes on to say that you could say that guests not arriving is not very profound. But just ordinary expectations of waiting and expectations mundane. But he says shunyata is not far from that. It's a glimpse of emptiness. And he says, actually, shunyata experience takes place in very simple moments of life. At the point when our expectations are fading out and future possibilities have not turned up, there is a faint little gap in which there is that possibility of some unknown factor taking place. And we can't quite pinpoint that, but it's there. And we know it, we experience that. And again, it's not all that fantastic or profound to experience shunyata, but throughout our life there are possibilities of encountering gaps in our expectations. Usually we think he goes on to say, usually we think in terms of hope and fear. This is referring again back to business deal mentality of the give and take and so on. Usually we think in terms of hope and fear, but something beyond hope and fear is possible. Emptiness is also taking place. Whether we call it hope and fear, behind the whole thing, there's a feeling of not knowing exactly what to do, which seemingly is based on ignorance or confusion. But not knowing what to do is not necessarily ignorance. It could be that we've just run out of new games, gimmicks, new concepts to fill the gap. We may have run out of ammo, so to speak. And if we think about these moments in our life, sometimes these can be very uncomfortable and really hard to stay with because we're so habituated to having ammo. We're so habituated to having new games, gimmicks, new concepts to fill the gap. But what he's suggesting is that we could just relax. We could just see. We could just be in awareness in these moments. He says this not finding new possibilities, not finding new tactics, not finding new techniques or plans is shunyata. With shunyata, it is not possible to come up with anything. That's how the chapter ends. and he leaves us with a gap. So now we have a gap, a little bit of time for questions and answers or comments or experiences or not knowing, whatever it might be. Could be a gap of not knowing right now. Miriam?
Yeah, I think for me tonight, for the first time, the last half of twofold egolessness was finally clear, or at least I became aware of it. I had no, I, I, I was still blind in that area, and it's the emptiness of, or at least the non-personal nature of everything that we perceive. And so that kind of freed me. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And then we have to let that go too.
I don't know why, but at this point in time, these two chapters have made everything much clearer for me. You know, going back to Chogyam was a good idea.
That was one of the questions I meant to say in the beginning, and it slipped my mind. I was going to say that we had read these chapters before, and I was wondering what it was like for people to read them again, if you remember. So thank you for bringing that up. Yes, every time I read these chapters, I get something new out of it.
Ditto.
Well, there were two chapters that I hadn't underlined, so somehow it was difficult to grasp the first time around. Yeah.
This make this famous concept of shunyata more approachable, understandable, meaningful. What do you think? Or is it still obscure, difficult?
Well, to me, it's clearer than it ever was. And I don't know if it's because of the previous readings we did, because of my experiences in between, my own work. I'm not sure. But yeah, it clicked.
Yeah, right. Yeah, for me in the beginning, whatever that means, at some point in the past, shunyata was a very, what's the word, intimidating concept. And it's becoming more and more recognizable and a part of one's experience, my experience, our experience. We could end early and save discussion for tomorrow night. Love to hear from people though. I guess the question comes to me for you is this useful? Is this describing your experience or leading you on into the path? John.
Yeah, I think without question it's useful. There's no question about it. I not unlike what Miriam said, I find that as I revisit um, this material for the second or third time, that I realize how little I absorbed in the earlier readings. But these concepts are not. I mean, as simple as they seem to be, um, I find, at least for myself, that when I really think I'm practicing them, I find it's just I'm in deceit. I mean, it's just not true, um, and that they remain out there in front of me as something that I still have to uh, uh, hesitate to say work on, but I mean in the sense of absorbing the sort of depth of what these words are in terms of acceptance of a reality, of that reality that they're talking about, that he's talking about. So yeah, I don't think we should stop uh, studying this stuff. I mean, it's just too important.
Thank you. I agree. I think it sinks in little by little, gets clearer and clearer, for me anyhow, over time.
Carolyn?
This is so valuable. I come, I absorb, and you continually remind me that I just have to show up, whether it's here or for the daily practices. And you remind me I don't have to try harder. I show up. So this is incredibly important. Thank you.
What's been extremely useful to me is how much clearer I get gradually or sometimes suddenly about uh, when I identify and take ownership of my mood states or feelings, and helps me let go of defining myself by them. You know, things like, you know, periods of sadness or depression or anxiety or whatever it is, I'm gradually becoming clearer on seeing them as passing phenomena as opposed to identifying with them and defining myself by them. You know, you know, and obviously the more intensely I feel them at any given moment, I'm recognizing my tendency to identify them, and it's helping me let go of that and see them more clearly as passing phenomena and and more like, you know, just any perception that comes and goes, you know, without identifying with it, you know, and owning them. And it helps me let go of that, and it helps me see it clearer in other people when they're doing it. And I, I think overall helps me be more compassionate in that regard, you know, with others, and in my personal life and in my professional life. You know. So thank you guys. Thanks everybody. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. These teachings are teaching me not to believe my own thoughts, which are so full of suffering of one kind or another. Sometimes it's anxiety, sometimes it's pride, sometimes it's jealousy, sometimes it's fear, who knows what. And they're all contained, all those things, in thoughts, concepts. And one can let it go. The teachings are telling us that this stuff isn't real, that it's just our neurotic imaginings, and to let it go. What an amazing, it's not easy. What an amazing instruction. And to simply be here in clarity. Philip.
So I agree with everyone. There's so much to say. Coming back and rereading this book from a year ago or 2 years ago is so much deeper and so much richer because we're different readers coming back. But I raised my hand just then because I want to share this agreement with these words, which express what everyone is saying in a slightly different way, which appeals to me anyhow. It goes like this. Whatever arises in the mind has no importance at all because it has no reality whatsoever. Don't become attached to it. Don't pass judgment. Only our searching for happiness prevents us from seeing it.
Where does that come from?
Some place in the Turgar course, Mingyur Rinpoche's course, the Mahamudra course. But it's all the same thing. It's what John Tyler was saying. The more you do it, the less you're a part of it. And the more you do it, the hope and fear related to your own practice becomes less and less and less. The watcher just fades into the background and disappears. Or as John Baker says, there's just experience. Or as Michael says, just that. And it's all like that, but we can't ever really see it except here and there. But to our immense good fortune, we're learning to see it more and more often, more and more regularly. And that's how it really is. Only our searching for happiness prevents us from seeing it.
And our self-doubt.
Yeah. Don't become attached to it. Don't pass judgment. Yeah, clearly this is the most important stuff I've ever learned.
I think, too, we're beginning to have more trust in the fact that we are fundamentally Buddha. The whole idea of self-improvement is a matter of lack of that kind of trust, feeling of distrust. we're getting very close to the end for today. Anybody else? Haven't heard from so many people. Maybe we'll hear more from you tomorrow in the discussion group. Lodro, you must have thoughts about this.
Nothing concise and short, but if I can put it into the right words, I might share tomorrow.
Ed,
Yeah, as we do this, and we reread these things, certainly we learn more or perceive more each time we do it. But I've spent my whole career being measured and being evaluated, and I'm really happy that in Buddhist practice I don't. I don't say, well, I've gotten this far and I have to go this much farther, or this, I could do more, I could perceive more, I could be a better bodhisattva. What delights me, and I see shining through the pages each time that we read, no matter what it is wherever you are, that's great. Whatever you're doing, that's great, because we all have the right intention, we all have the right motivation.
Well said.
or shall we say the closing chants?
Yeah. Mute myself.
We'll close with a prayer for peace and with a dedication of merit generated by our practice for the benefit of all sentient beings. By the blessings of enlightened and compassionate ones, by the power of my positive actions of 3 times and my prayers of pure aspiration, may wars, conflicts, epidemics, and all other maladies dissolve in this world, and may the earth and all who live on this earth enjoy the abundance of well-being. May all learn to live lovingly with each other. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Michael,
Thank you, John and Michael.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks a lot.
everyone.
Thank
You
you.
all.
Wonderful to see you all.
Good to see everybody.
See everyone tomorrow.
Thank you all.
Take
Good
care,
night.
everyone.
Night.
Good night. Good. Glad you were able to.
What?
I guess you should stop. I'm glad you were able to sign in. I guess you could stop recording.
Yeah, I'm going to stop recording. Wait, hold on a second.